Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, wherever you are in the world. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to this 5e Sens talk dedicated to sustainability and fragrances. Together with 5e Sens and the 5e Sens community, the international community around the world, we have organized a series of webinars about sustainability and fragrances. And we would like to share with you the insights from different countries and different geographical areas in the network of 5e Sens. My name is Anna Sabidussi. I am the founder of Scent.Academy and the partner of 5e Sens in the Benelux and in Northern Europe. Why to talk about sustainability and about fragrances? Well, this is in fact a very strong priority in the fragrance industry. Not only now, not only recently, but since more than 20 years. In that sense, it is a top priority at the industry level. I think that the industry has really realized that doing good is possible together with doing well. And in fact, this has been realized in many different activities and initiatives that we do see happening in the industry. Just to clarify what we mean when we talk about sustainability, we refer to the combination of economical, environmental, and societal aspects. And at the intersection of these elements, there is the sustainable development. Well, we have seen the fragrance industry really taking into consideration all these different elements. Not only that, what we see is that there is a transition in the business practices of the industry, moving from just sustainability, intended as limiting harm to the environment, for instance, like reducing CO2 emissions, to more restorative practices, where in fact the use of natural resources is compensated, up to regenerative practices, where there is a positive contribution both to the environment as well as to the communities and to society. The fragrance industry is also a truly global value chain, a chain that includes several actors. And during these talks, we are going to zoom in on the perspective from different countries of the key players in the industry. So, in fact, we invite you to join us in a tour around the world. And in this occasion, we are going to be talking together with our partner in the United States. So I would like to invite Catherine and Tammy to join us. Pleasure. It is a great pleasure to welcome you, Catherine Balcerski and Tammy Katz, founders of Serendipity and partners of 5e Sens. Hello, welcome. It's a great pleasure that you accepted to be our panelist for this first event, for this first 5e Sens talk. So at this point, we ask to you, Catherine and Tammy, how do you define clean in the US? And what exactly are consumers looking for when they are looking for a clean fragrance?
Great questions. Well, first, Anna, thank you so much for having us both. We're thrilled to be here. As you can tell from the poll, it's a very complex topic and means different things to different people. So I think that's very telling. In the US, I would say we're definitely seeing an evolution of consumer interest and awareness that started in the early 90s with green and natural and moved to organic in the early 2000s. And now it's all about clean. The US consumer is very focused on safety and transparency. Not every consumer, but we're definitely seeing a movement towards mainstream, requiring brands to really do their homework and up their game in all categories in order to deliver what the consumer is looking for. So clean is the newest layer, but what does clean actually mean? It can be an opinion, it can be polarizing because there's no real standardized industry definition or guideline. So it can be different from consumer to consumer, and it could be different brand to brand. We just saw that in the poll. But I think in general, what it means to the US consumer is it's an intersection between safety, ethics, transparency, and I would say sustainability. People want to be sure that what they are putting in their bodies and the products that they're using are free of toxins and really don't cause any harm. In terms of ingredients, I would say it's generally understood that clean doesn't have to be natural or organic, but many consumers misunderstand that and they think that clean equals natural. I also think that the clean movement has changed a way a lot of consumers are doing their shopping and purchasing. They're becoming much more aware of product ingredients, which is definitely better for a healthier environment. This is true of what they're putting in their bodies as well as what they're putting on their bodies. And they really are demanding transparency from the brands and fragrance houses. It requires a massive amount of education on a topic that is really not that simple to understand. In addition, I think that brands are always trying to differentiate themselves from each other, which is important, and they should be. And it's a great way to differentiate yourself by saying you're clean or natural or transparent. It's a great way to do it. However, in doing so, it's almost giving the consumer the perception that a brand that is not marketed in those ways must be bad for you. And that's false. That is just not the case. Kath, what do you think?
In fact, I think you're completely right. There are brands that have been on the market for many, many years that are very safe and ethical and conscious, but maybe haven't used that messaging in their brand communication. So there is this sort of feeling like those brands might not be safe, but in fact they are. So just because a brand doesn't really use that in their brand positioning doesn't mean that the rest of the brands out there are not safe. That's not true. The other thing I think that we see in this clean movement is an evolution. People are much more socially conscious, and that is coming into play in their product purchases as well. So it's about all of the elements that Tammy talked about with clean, but people are looking for brands that stand for the same social values that they stand for. So they're becoming more and more discerning. They're very discriminating in who they buy from. And they want to know that the brands they buy from really have strong beliefs, they give back, etc. Having said all that, all of these are really positive intentioned motivations on the part of the consumer. But I will say that here in this country, for sure, consumers are not willing to compromise quality. They're not willing to compromise on the performance of their product. If it doesn't smell good, they won't want to buy it. If it doesn't look good, they won't want to buy it. If it doesn't work, they won't want to buy it. So all of this, there's a lot of demands on brands to kind of meet all of these desires of the consumer and at the same time deliver the performance that the consumer has come to expect. What's really interesting in our market, and you can see it from the poll, because there's no clear definition of what clean means, brands, retailers, and third-party organizations have all created their own definitions. So it's really a complex landscape. So from retailers, we have retailers like Whole Foods, we have Grove Collaborative, we have Ulta, we have Sephora, we have Blue Mercury, we have Target. All of these retailers have their own sort of definition of clean standards that a brand will want to kind of comply to in order to receive that seal, clean at Sephora, for example. You kind of qualify for that seal. In addition, you have some other third-party organizations like Credo, which has their own definition of clean. You have EWG Verified, which has its own definition of clean. And then you have other certifying organizations like vegan, GMO-free, gluten-free, USDA bio-based. All of these things are different ways that clean is being defined. And so if you are a brand and you would like to sell to all those retailers and you would like to have all of those seals on your packaging that convey to the consumer in a quick and easy understandable way that you are clean, it's layer upon layer upon layer of sort of guidelines. And as you do that, you create tighter and tighter and tighter restrictions for that brand to operate under. It's a really complex kind of message. Most of the sort of clean definitions include something that we call a no-no list or a free-from list. So it's a long list of materials that that particular certifying organization will not allow. Sometimes these are very broad brush chemical categories and can be a little bit misleading. And they're really complicated to keep track of for a retailer. So, you know, what do we mean by all of this? The clean movement is here to stay. It is evolving. It is growing more and more mainstream. Brands are adopting this and really working hard to deliver to consumers what their expectations are. But because we don't have clear guidelines, there is this sort of race between retailers and brands to kind of out clean each other in a way. And it just is a moving target. What does clean mean? It's a moving target. So as a brand, you've got to really be paying attention to who you want to be and what you want to stand for. And as a consumer, it's even more complicated because you just really have to do your homework and study.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Very interesting thoughts. But let's just dive into something that you mentioned. You mentioned that many consumers believe that clean equals natural. And there is, in fact, some misconception about natural versus synthetics. Can you please elaborate a little bit further about the pros and cons of using naturals versus synthetics as fragrance ingredients?
Absolutely. It's such a complex topic, Anna. Again, no black and white answers, and brands really have to make some tough decisions and some conscious choices, because who doesn't love naturals? We all love naturals. They're beautiful, they're distinctive, they're rich, but unfortunately, natural is just not always best. And I think it's the fallacy is that just because something is natural, it must be good, or because something is not natural, it must be bad. And the truth is that nature is full of things that at the wrong levels can be hazardous to human health, but at the right levels can be fine. Perfect example is the sun. You know, it's fine to be out in the sun a few minutes every single day, but it's not healthy to be in the sun 3, 4, 5 hours every day. Or even salt. It's okay to have a little salt in your diet, but if you ate a kilo of salt, you'd become seriously ill. So amounts matter, levels definitely matter, because nature is not harmless. It is full of chemicals that can be toxic and harmful to humans, which really does undermine the claim that natural is always best. And I think it's important we have to consider CMRs, carcinogens, mutagens, reproductive toxins. These are naturally occurring in many, many natural ingredients like lemon, basil, nutmeg, and we eat these items every single day in moderation, and they don't hurt us. The same can be true for these ingredients, which have the same CMRs used in perfumery. If the ingredients are used properly at the right levels, there's very, very low risk. In addition, naturals can also tend to contain some skin allergens. So you can see it's not very clear that natural doesn't always equal clean and safe. And when it comes to the production of fragrances, natural ingredients aren't always the most sustainable option. Often when you're sourcing natural ingredients, it requires harvesting techniques that can wreak havoc on the earth and the surrounding communities. And as consumers are demanding more natural products, the demand is going to go up. That will translate to increased harvesting, increased risk of irresponsible farming, increased risk to poorly treated communities that are affected. And this is where you can see that synthetic materials can sometimes be the more sustainable and environmentally responsible option. So this really where you start to realize how complex an issue naturals versus synthetic ingredients can really be. Kath, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
I do. It's a topic near and dear to our hearts. We actually teach a class. One of our training classes is about the perfumer's palette, where we really dive into naturals and synthetics and what it all means. I want to just, one of the reasons I think the word synthetic ingredient gets a kind of a bad connotation, it's become a dirty word in a way, is that people think of synthetics as chemicals, and chemicals are therefore bad. And I would just like to make sure that everyone understands that natural ingredients are complex mixtures of chemicals. Water is chemicals, so chemicals are not inherently bad. We have sort of marketed ourselves into this synthetic is bad situation. Naturals are really beautiful. They are labor intensive, they are logistically complex. We depend on Mother Nature very strongly to make sure that the crops are grown and they give us the quality of product that we're looking for. And when Mother Nature doesn't cooperate with us, we can have droughts, we can have floods, and crops suffer, and therefore raw materials are not consistent. Or maybe there's a political unrest in a place where we typically used to get materials, or something has been farmed out. All of these things impact the supply and the availability of naturals. So imagine if you are a brand, widely distributed brand that depends very heavily on naturals, and something happens, you might not be able to deliver the product that your consumer is expecting. Think of fragrance ingredients very much like wine. Year to year, the crops vary. Year to year, the wine tastes differently. So year to year, the same is true of natural ingredients. So this is one of the reasons why we use synthetics. The other reason is that if you consider the demand of fragrance, an average consumer in this country anyway uses about 12 scented products every day, not just fine fragrance. So if you imagine that the interest on the part of consumers for all naturals, we would not have enough earth in our world to farm all of the natural products that we would need to farm to meet that demand. I mean, even if you take laundry detergent alone, think of the volumes of laundry detergent we all use, we wouldn't be able to create and grow enough natural materials to supply that demand. So, it's another reason we look at synthetics. Having said that, from a perfumery standpoint, naturals give a complexity, a dimension, an absolute authenticity, and a really complex kind of feeling to a fragrance. So we love them, and perfumers love to use them. Sometimes they're not so cost available for different types of products because they can be expensive for all the reasons we just mentioned. So now let's talk about synthetics. Synthetics are organic chemical compounds that are made in labs by scientists. And why do we use them? Some natural products cannot be processed. There are types of flowers, for example, muguet, lilac, these things, you cannot process them. The flowers are too fragile to process. So we create synthetic materials to replicate things that we cannot actually get from nature for use in perfumery. We make synthetic materials so that we can get the scale that we need to keep our costs under control, to get consistent supply so it's the same every single batch. And if we do this correctly in a sustainable way, there's no reason why synthetics have to be a bad word. The other reason we create synthetics is because it expands the perfumer's palette. It gives perfumers a new tool in their toolbox. It's like an artist having a new color to work with. They can paint something different if they have this new color. So think of that way for synthetic materials. If the innovation that is happening right now on the part of the fragrance manufacturers, and I think, Anna, you alluded to this a little bit, there is a lot of innovation in terms of supply, what sources we're using to make our synthetics, how are we keeping our footprint low, our environmental footprint low. We're using upcycled materials. We're talking about fermentation. We're using green chemistry. So a lot is happening here. It is not perfect yet, but the initiatives and the investment is there. So really, what does it all mean? You can see, I think, from what we've talked about, that the use of naturals and synthetics is in combination is typically what perfumers like to do. And it can give us something that is very clean and safe. Just because we're using synthetics doesn't mean that we're not safe. There is really no hard line that you can draw that says one is bad and one is good. Remember, the best option for sustainability and safety may actually come from something that doesn't come from the earth. So if you really strip back what consumers want, they say they want natural, but really deep down what they want is something safe. They want something that works, they want something that smells good, and they want something that does not cause harm in any way. So we kind of feel that brands and fragrance houses, that we all need to take the initiative to educate the consumer more so that there's more understanding here about the value of the different types of materials that we use and the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting elements to consider. But then the question, I mean, probably remains, how do we really know if our fragrances are really clean and sustainable? And how are the brands communicating these messages? Can you elaborate a little bit on this element?
Sure, Anna. I think that in most cases, the fragrances in our products are generally safe. And that is because the fragrance manufacturers, the perfume houses, they belong to the industry association called IFRA, International Fragrance Association, and they are committed to following IFRA standards, whose mission, their sole mission of IFRA, is to manage the safe use of fragrance. In the US, brands are required to put the word fragrance or parfum on the label of any product that contains fragrance. But consumers are very suspicious about why brands aren't required to list every single ingredient that's in the fragrance. People want to know what is in this single word. What does it mean? And because it's not required by the government, they believe there must be something awful or bad for them in there. So they think that the fragrance houses are hiding something. So that begs the question, why don't perfume houses just tell us what's in the formula and put it on the label? Well, they do share their formulas all the time with the brand safety toxicology departments to ensure the safe use of all fragrances. But fragrances, like Kath was saying, they're very complex mixtures of ingredients, and fragrance formulas are generally quite long. They could be anywhere from 30 to over 200 ingredients in one fragrance formula. It would be physically impossible to list all of these items on a single label, especially a small fragrance product. So what some brands are opting to do is they are including their fragrance ingredients on their website in order to be more transparent with the consumer. This approach is fine. It does require a lot of explanation, a tremendous amount of education about each ingredient, as there are over 3,000 ingredients, possible ingredients that a perfumer can actually use when creating a fragrance. And many of them are very, very hard to pronounce words. It could take a PhD in chemistry to be able to decode it all, honestly. And it does, because there are teams of scientists who study the safety of each and every fragrance ingredient that is used. So when a consumer gets a recipe or a formula, will they even know what it means? Probably not. So now let's talk a little bit about sustainability of fragrance. I'm very happy to say that what is changing a lot are the fragrance houses' sustainability initiatives, which include environmental footprint, reforestation, responsible sourcing so that they can ensure there's no slash or burn agriculture, sustainable innovation with green chemistry and upcycling, and a lot of concern for the people and the surrounding communities. Because you have to consider that a fragrance house has to source thousands and thousands of ingredients, naturals and synthetics. So the traceability and environmental impact of all of these is very complex, and it's not perfect yet, but the initiatives are in place and the industry is really embracing it. So how do we make the best fragrance choices? I would say because of the sheer number of ingredients used, both natural and synthetic, it's not an easy task to know exactly what practices are used and how responsible the source is. But for brands, I think it really depends heavily on choosing the right fragrance partner who will work very closely with you to accomplish your clean positioning, and that helps you stay true to your brand's promise. For consumers, it's really down to researching and deciding which brands that they trust. Because of the complexity of all of these topics, there's no foolproof way to know how clean or transparent a brand is. And the best thing that a consumer can do now is just ask the questions of the brands and the retailers that they're purchasing from. Kath, what do you think we're seeing in the marketplace?
So as you said, a lot of brands are really embracing this educational value, being transparent, sharing what's in their formulas on their websites. Even if they can't fit it all on the package, they're really working hard to kind of be transparent and educate. I would like to say that there are also some brands out there that are providing maybe some information that is a little bit misleading. We call this term greenwashing. Brands are communicating a lot of sort of scary messages. You're kind of almost scaring them into buying your product. So here's an example. We don't add CMRs. It doesn't mean that there are no CMRs in this product. It just means that they have not intentionally added. It also could possibly mean that other brands are adding these bad things. So that's one. The next one is no disgusting or yucky chemicals. Yes, that is actually on someone's website. That does not mean anything. It doesn't mean it's clean. It doesn't mean it's safe. The next one is this product contains linalool, which is used in cockroach insecticide. This was on a critique of a brand that used linalool. And if you know anything about naturals, linalool is a very prevalent, naturally occurring material in many natural products. Case in point, one of the most revered naturals that we all love is lavender. Linalool is in lavender. So saying this product contains linalool, which is in cockroach insecticide, is terrifying to a consumer. They will now probably never buy anything that has linalool in it. We also see synthetic fragrance production causes toxic waste. Terrifying scare tactic. That is not the case. The next one, no hard to pronounce chemical names. They're almost all hard to pronounce chemical names. The next one is really kind of inferring natural, but not saying you're natural, nature powered, nature inspired scents, nature powered goodness. These are all things that sound great, but don't imply, that do not really say that the product is natural. And lastly, one on synthetics that is interesting. We use synthetics, but we mix them in-house. It's almost to say that because we have control of them, they're not harmful. At least it's an acknowledgement that synthetics are used and that they're not dangerous. But you can see through some of these examples that they're not entirely, they're kind of quick one-liners that are trying to convey this this feeling of natural, but not necessarily true. So natural and clean, I should say. So what does it all mean? What it really means is that it's a complex topic. There is no definition in this country, and until there is one, we are a bit on a roller coaster. You know, as we continue to define clean in a different way, brands embrace it differently, retailers embrace it differently. So it's not easy for brands, it's not easy for consumers, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us really to educate and take the time and investment to share with consumers what we're doing and why.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your vision. We still have 10 minutes before closing this session. So I would love to, give the floor to the participants and to the questions that all of you who are attending this webinar may have. Please feel free to write your questions in the chat. And we are going to, to propose your inputs to Catherine and to Tammy so that they can give their feedback. I have myself a question because you have experience in creating fragrances for your clients. What about your experience in creating clean fragrances for your clients when you receive a brief request in this specification?
We're definitely seeing an uptick in our client base of brands that want to be able to deliver consumers what they are looking for when it comes to clean and safe fragrances, while not sacrificing the fragrance quality or the fragrance experience. We work very, very closely with all of our fragrance house partners on these complex topics to ensure that the claims that our brands want to make is really in harmony with the creative approach that the fragrance house is taking. It's made much harder by the fact that there really are no true industry standards or regulations like we spoke about. And it's really important for the fragrance and safety guardrails to be in place before the creative process begins. Because this is what is going to actually determine the fragrance palette the ingredient palette that the perfumers will have to work with. When you layer certification on top of certification and clean parameters, what you're doing is you're really limiting the palette and dramatically making it much, much smaller. So there's definitely going to have to be some sort of a trade-off that the brands are going to have to accept, but perfumers are willing to take the challenge and to work in a different way. And the creative process will certainly take, I think, a little bit more time, because they're going to want to achieve the right hedonics of the fragrance without sacrificing quality or the full experience for the consumer.
Thank you very much.
I think sometimes there's a little bit of, I just wanted to add that sometimes I think there's another, sometimes a brand has to really rethink how they're positioned, because, for example, if you're a brand that you want to be all natural or all essential oils and you are marketing to people with sensitive skin, you might have to rethink that positioning because they're a bit at odds with each other. So we are constantly having those kinds of conversations to really help the brand define where they want to play.
Absolutely. And we do have a question from the audience about nanoparticles. What about nanoparticles in fragrances?
Okay, well, I am not an expert in nanoparticles, but I think that probably the question relates to if there are very, 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 very minute amounts of material, maybe bad actors in an ingredient, should those ingredients be used? I'm not sure if that's the context of the question, but what I would say in general is that fragrance ingredients, as Tammy said, these are complex mixtures of multiple ingredients. Part of the guidelines that perfume houses follow is how much of a particular ingredient can be allowed in a particular end use application. It's quite complex. So if there are some, for example, CMRs, which are not good actors, but if they're part of a naturally occurring basil oil, for example, the basil oil level that's allowed in a perfume construction will be capped at a certain point, so that what we know about the product is that it will not be harmful at the level at which it's been capped. I hope that kind of makes sense, that, as Tammy said, levels matter. If you drink too much water, you can die. I mean, it happens to marathoners, right? They drink too much water and they can die. So anything in the wrong quantities can be harmful. At very low levels, the risk level becomes low.
Absolutely. And we have another question about the definition of clean. It seems that as far as the definition of clean is concerned, both brands and retailers are making their own definition. However, because of a natural commercial need to be distributed, it seems that the retailers might end up in the lead with the definition more than the brands. Is this an assumption that we can make, in your opinion?
I think it's an interesting trade-off, because you're right that the brands are defining essentially. Some retailers are defining, we will not sell your product, we will not offer your product unless you meet these guidelines. Other retailers are saying, if you want to have the clean at seal for that particular retailer, you must meet these guidelines. Otherwise, we will offer your product maybe in another section of the store, but if you want to be under the clean banner over in this aisle, you have to meet these restrictions. So the retailers, from that standpoint, I think the question gets to like kind of who's in charge here. The retailers absolutely do have that. And brands will have to decide if they want to meet those objectives to achieve those kinds of the seals, let's call them, kind of the logo. So, but a brand, I guess a brand can decide if it's more important for them to have their own positioning and not, maybe sell to that particular retailer because they stand for something different. That's a brand choice.
They have to make a lot of choices, tough decisions, and different things to different people.
We have another question.
Go ahead.
We have another question about the wording, clean fragrances. outside of the United States? What is your perception? You work in an international setting, so what is your perception about the world in clean fragrances outside of the United States?
I have to say I'm not well versed in what kinds of definitions are being used around the world. I think that's one of the reasons that it's really important that we're having these CS talks, because it is a really complex and difficult topic to understand. And so I'm anxious to hear the rest of the talks, to hear what people have to say about that question, because honestly, I don't know.
We do know that the labeling laws in Europe are a little bit more strict than they are in the US. So I think that the consumer is getting a little bit more information from that perspective. But yeah, we're really interested to hear what our colleagues have to say around the world.
We have another question about your opinion. What do you see as the next innovative movement within the industry to marry the vision of brands with satisfying consumer concerns?
I think there is so much innovation happening in the supplier end. I listened to a fascinating webinar the other day about some of the green chemistry that is happening that will take sort of leftover, waste from one kind of food manufacturer process and use that as a raw material for synthetic ingredients. It's incredible types of chemistry. My background is chemistry, and so this kind of thing really excites me. And I think the more of that innovation that happens, and as the desire by the consumer to have products that are really environmentally conscious, sustainable, safe, all of these kinds of things I think are colliding into a place that is really good. I think that it's the innovation in raw materials for me that is really going to help us deliver better and better to the brands and the consumers.
I also think that the best fragrances are really created using both science and nature, and I think it allows for the creation of the cleanest, most responsible products for consumers.
And what about your own creative process? What about your preference for working with synthetics and naturals?
We like to work with both. We really, like I said, we think that that's, where we get the best fragrances from, is when you work with science and with nature.
It's interesting, if you look through history, some of our very earliest fragrances, going back to the late 1800s, used synthetic materials. And that is where a lot of the real creative innovation happened. When a perfumer was brave enough to try something new, something that was synthetic, some of these nature identical synthetics go back to the mid 1800s. So as they're using those materials, they're creating something really different and remarkable and really interesting to consumers, and create a new want, a new satisfaction, a new experience. So it's not new. Synthetics are not new. We kind of talk about them like they're the big bad chemical companies that are offering these, but these things have been around for a really long time. So we like them.
Absolutely. And we have an interesting comment from Mexico that clean in Mexico is absolutely not related and not understood. So indeed, there are differences across geographical areas, across countries. And this is, in fact, the very reason why we are holding this 5e Sens talks, so that we can really discuss about key issues in sustainability and related, of course, to the fragrance industry, and to gain a global perspective about all these very interesting elements for reflection. I would like to thank you very, very much, Tammy and Catherine, for your contribution and for being panelists in this first session. I would like to invite all the participants to register if you have not yet done so to the other 5e Sens talk. Tomorrow we are going to be hosting many more interesting arguments and discussion points, and we look very much forward to welcoming you to the next edition of the 5e Sens talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Anna. It's been a pleasure. Been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.